Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to Somatic Tip Wednesday. This is the third video of this series, and today we are going to be talking about resources, and I have a little exercise that I'm going to encourage you to do along with this little clip today. Welcome. So, let me just kind of define first what a resource is, and then I'm gonna go through some things and then we'll go over the exercise. So a resource is anyone or anything that helps you to feel a sense of mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical well-being. And what we understand about trauma is that in the moment, and if we're living in this state chronically, we tend to be disconnected from these innate and inherent resources that we have. So resources can be something that are hidden, they can be something that's obvious, they can be something that is active or something that is forgotten, and resources can be internal or they can be external. Again, like I've said in all the other videos, this is coming from 12 self-somatic exercises by Peter Levine, who's the founder of Somatic Experiencing. So let me give you some examples of what an internal resource is and what an external resource is. An internal resource is something like your innate intelligence, the resiliency that you may have within your nervous system. It might be a spiritual practice that you have. It might be, oh no, that's an external, excuse me. The thing that happens is that sometimes these external resources, and hopefully this is the case, where these external resources, like let's say a spiritual practice, maybe it's breath work, maybe it's grounding your feet into the grass, has a way of shifting your energetics on the inside. And when it shifts that thing on the inside and it becomes an embedded part of your structure in your system, so much so that even when you just go to think about this thing, it causes a shift within your physiology, that becomes an internal resource. So that's something that was once external that becomes internal. So that's why I got it confused for a minute. So some examples of internal resources are talents, instinctual wisdom, resiliency, intelligence, strength, agility. It could be physical strength, right? Those are all things that are coming from the inside. Examples of external would be like the spiritual practice that I named, friends, nature, an animal. Maybe you like to go outside and watch the birds. I just saw a blue jay this morning. It was absolutely beautiful. I felt very blessed by its presence. Dance, movement, music, any athletics, something that, any kind of athletics, tai chi, karate, kickboxing. All examples of external resources, which again can eventually become embedded internal resources. So what we know is that people who have gone through really in the formative years, early development, intense and extreme trauma, the person might not have a lot of access to resources. They might feel sparse, they might feel weak, these little tiny, sometimes we call them islands of safety. And those islands might be far apart, they might be quite small. However, even the most traumatized individual who has been through extreme levels of trauma have been able to find resources. You can absolutely find them. They do exist, even if it's difficult at first. some people who have been through, like some examples of this could be like a tree, a guardian of some type, an ability to be connected to the spirit world or their own spiritual higher self, to source. I've seen people who are gone through really, really intense trauma early on, and they tend to be some of the most spiritually connected people because that's actually where they found their safety. So it exists. I'm just looking at some of my notes here so I can make sure I go through everything. What we were doing in the first 2 videos on this were around boundaries and containment. And this next piece is going to lead us into the one that's going to come after this, which is around tracking sensations. But we need to have those first 2 foundations around containment and boundaries to even set us up to do what we're doing today, which is to find the resources. Because in doing that, if you've been following along with those first 2, which is a reason why it's ordered this way, then you've already found some internal resources through that. Some island of safety within yourself, which is really, really important, because when we begin to track sensation, sometimes we find things within our own being that have been compacted and contracted. And in fact, I would say that is most definitely what we're going to find somewhere along the way. And so we have to have this built in, and this understanding in an embodied sense of containment, because that extends and expands our capacity to be able to move through what it is that's coming up that's uncomfortable. So, if you're wondering, how do I start this process? Because what we're going to do, what I'm going to recommend that you do, is to get a piece of paper and to divide it down the middle, and on one side to write down external resources, and on the other side, internal resources. And if it seems challenging at first, what I want you to think about is, in those situations of trauma, what allowed me to get through it? What were my strengths? What do I feel like assisted me the most? So maybe start there. Start with some of the external things. And if you notice that certain things are missing, like let's say you're wanting more connection or something, then you might actually then use your own axis of power, right? Using the free will that we have, because when we are acting from a space of trauma, we're not acting from our free will. We know that. We're acting from these ingrained, habitual, automatic, these autonomic patterns within the system and within the personality structure. We're not really acting from free will. So when we realize that there might be something missing on the list that we'd like to have, we get to then make a choice in our life to bring that in. And that's a really exciting thing. And if you notice, I just want to take this one step farther, if you notice something within your being says, oh, I can't do that. I don't know where I'm going to find somebody like that. Like, let's say I want to bring in a friend to go for walks with. Then we need to examine the belief structure. Then we need to examine, where did that structure get embedded in your system? So we can start there. Okay. So essentially, as I was saying, even if these things are vague or weak, the more you can add to the list. So you start this list, and then over time, I want you to start to get really curious about orienting yourself to life in a different way. When we are operating from a space of trauma, trauma has this way of sort of sucking us down into this vortex. And what I want to invite you to do is to begin to orient yourself to the world inside of you and to the world outside of you from a space of what might be here that is neutral or pleasant or possibly feels safe in some capacity or resourcing. And the more that you start to practice this, the more that you're going to realize that there might actually be more resources than you even kind of know, because we're not really used to paying attention to those kinds of things. And we have to sort of retrain our own focus to bring those things in and start to integrate and embed them within our system. As we're calling up and out that which we do not wish to have embedded in our system anymore, because some of it's not even ours. Some of it is. So, I love the way that Peter said this. This is the last little piece I'm going to say before closing out here, which is he described how one of the greatest resources that we have is in noticing our body and our internal experience and how it shifts. Now, even for somebody where it feels like they're kind of stuck in one place and there isn't a whole lot of shifting happening, there are micro shifts. For others, it might be more noticeable. You might really have moments where you feel dramatically different from one moment to the next. That is the greatest resource that we have, because in that we continue to remember that these things are temporary and that this is something that we have the capacity to move through. Again, trauma has a way of convincing us that something is going to last forever. If I had to say, one of the most common things I hear from some of my clients is that when they're experiencing a negative emotion, there's really deep fear that this depression or this grief is going to last forever. And yet, when you actually go back and look at that person's life experience, that's never the case. That's never the case for anyone. There's always some kind of wave out of that, even if it's slight. And so those are the things that we want to be noticing. And we have this incredible capacity as beings to move from discomfort to comfort, from contraction to expansion, from fear to compassion, from estrangement, isolation, abandonment, and shutdown to vitality and initiation. These are some of the things that he named, and I just think this is so potent because we can forget that. There is duality here that we can play with. And it's in playing with this duality of contraction and expansion that we begin to move ourselves into something entirely different, which is the healing experience. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys for being here, and I will see you next Wednesday for the beginning of the sensation tracking portion of this series. Be well, and I will see you later.